Welcome to Pinnacle Performance Company's Fishbowl Friday with Pinnacle co-founder and COO G. Riley Mills and master instructor and editorial director Brad Lawrence.
Get pumped. It's Fishbowl Friday with Pinnacle Performance Company. I'm Brad. This is Gary. Gary, what are we doing?
Let's get pumped. We have a fishbowl right here with lots of questions. We're going to pick one. We're going to talk about that topic, give you some tools, and then send you on your way. Ready to go?
I'm ready.
All right. Let me draw this one.
Oh,
That was a really good one, too.
it's already off the rails.
So here we go. Oh, this is a good one. How do I become a better storyteller?
Oh,
Storytelling.
okay. I like stories.
Yeah.
You like stories?
Yeah, I love stories.
We're both playwrights.
We are.
Yeah.
We are both storytellers.
You're an Emmy Award-winning playwright.
There you go.
You should know about
I
storytelling.
really love stories.
Yeah. Well, where do you want to start this? Because this is something that I feel like gets asked about a lot. People want to be better storytellers.
So let's start with the why, and then we'll get to the how in a second.
Okay.
So why do you want to be a better storyteller? It seems in the question they know that's a trait, whether you're a leader or a team member, why it's important. So first off, human beings wired for stories. We love them.
Yeah.
You binge your favorite show, you read your favorite book series, you go to your favorite movies. We love stories because they engage us, they excite us, they're emotional. Sometimes we learn things, we change based on what we learned in the story. Bottom line, human beings wired for stories ever since the beginning of time.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the entertainment landscape nowadays. The vast majority of the entertainment we consume, whatever you're binging, whatever you're reading, the movie that you saw, I mean, everything follows pretty much the same formula from Freitag.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Good storytellers, we know them. You can probably think right now, who in your family, at your work, on your team is good at stories? At the bar, while you're on the subway, who's good at stories? Are good storytellers born that way, or are they made into good storytellers?
That's a long conversation. I think for the most part, they're probably made.
Yeah,
I certainly think some people have an instinctive feel for stories, but for the most part, they're made, especially considering the Freitag storytelling formula, Gustav Freitag.
Yeah.
You want to talk about him?
Yeah, so we talk about it in our books. We talk about it in our trainings. There are different formulas. Our favorite one is just the classic story structure from Gustav Freitag, German novelist who broke down dramatic structure in a very simple way. So if you have a pen or if you have something to write this down, very simple. It's a little map. It's a little map, and there's a little line here, and then it goes up to a point, and then it comes down. That's the simplest way to lay it out. And it has 5 elements, sometimes 6, but 5 elements on it. You want to talk about the very first one?
Sure, and I think as we're going through these, think about good storytellers you know, or even bad ones.
Yeah.
Because chances are the reason they're good or the reason they're bad, if they're good, they probably adhere to this either consciously or instinctively, or if they're bad, they violate.
Yeah, and it's a classic structure used in everything from operas, Bible stories, Scooby-Doo cartoons. You're going to follow that generally.
Yeah.
There are other ones, but this is the classic one.
Think about something you're watching or reading right now, and I'm sure this applies.
First element.
So first is background.
Yeah, exposition. Who, what, when, where. You got to start there because I don't know your crazy Aunt Mary who lives in Gary, Indiana and has 100 cats in her basement. I don't know any of that. So you got to set up, here's where the story takes place, who's in it, where it is.
Context. We need context.
Context. So that's the first element, exposition. Once you've laid out that's the least interesting part, probably the most boring part of a story.
And where a lot of stories go wrong.
Too much exposition. So get through it, introduce us to everybody, and then we got to get to the good part, which is the second element, inciting incident. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, it's the catalyst. It's the jumping off point. It's the spark that ignites some kind of conflict. It asks an interesting question, but it changes the status quo in a way that sets the motion of the story.
Yeah, it's a trigger moment.
Yeah.
Once that happens, we're off to the races. If that trigger moment, that inciting incident doesn't happen, we don't have a story. But the minute that happens, game on, here we go. So once that second element, the inciting incident, happens, now we start the climb up all the way to the peak of that little formula that we mentioned. That is called?
Rising action.
Rising action. Conflict. Characters come up against each other. This happens, which makes this happen, which builds to this, which makes this happen. And it's tightening and tightening and rising and getting more dramatic and more interesting and more life and death until you get to the fourth element of the map, which is at the peak, at the pinnacle, at the top of that little map. What is it?
The climax.
The climax. What is the climax of a story?
It's the point of maximum tension. It's what everything's built toward. I mean, you can almost think of it like a teeter-totter. On one side of this or the other, we're going to have some kind of resolution. It's that last moment where things are in doubt. Like, oh, how's it going to end? How's it going to end? Okay, it goes that way.
Yeah, think of any Marvel movie. The
great
villain,
example.
the hero, they've been battling for the whole movie, and now finally they're face to face for the final confrontation. That's what we've waited for. Somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, somebody's going to live, somebody's going to die. We can't wait to have that question answered. What is that major dramatic question? How do we answer it in that climax? So once that happens, depending on which structure of Freitag's formula, there's either one or two elements. So sometimes there's 6, sometimes there's 5. One of the elements that's sometimes dropped off is falling action. So once that climax happens, what are the 2 or 3 bits of action plot that have to happen before you wind everything up? So that's falling action. Sometimes that's not included.
It's oftentimes present in more complex stories because there's other subplots and B plots that need to be wrapped up and things like that.
But the final element, whether it's 5 points or 6 points in your map, is
the takeaway.
Yeah, the resolution. Talk about how when you wrap a story up, what is the takeaway?
Well, thankfully, I think it's right in the term. It's what you want your audience to take away. Why did you tell us this story? What's the moral of the story?
What's the lesson? What's the moral?
What do I
What's
literally
the
take away from
insight?
this?
Yeah. Why did you tell this to me, and what do you want me to learn from it? So drill that home. That's the final piece, the takeaway. It should be either explicit or implicit, so we know exactly what you wanted us to take away, the lesson you wanted us to learn.
It's the justification for telling the story. It's the linking moment between the story itself and whatever else your content is.
Yeah.
Right? That's why you told the story in the first place.
Yeah, so those are the elements that make up a good story, and if you follow that map, just by definition, it's going to be hard to screw up your story. It's going to be pretty good. As Brad said, the areas where people screw up a story or where it goes wrong, too much exposition, not building to a climax that's exciting, or a takeaway that's non-existent. I don't even know why you told me that boring story. What was the whole point of that? If somebody says, what's the point of your story? Your takeaway was weak. You got to go back and look at that element. But it works for everybody.
Yeah.
Anybody can use that formula. We've been using it for 20 years since the beginning of Pinnacle.
And I challenge you all tonight when you're watching something on your couch, see if you can identify those elements. I promise you they're there.
Yeah, or go tell a story you've told a bunch of times to your spouse or your coworker, your neighbor, and make sure all your elements are there. And ask them how they like the story, if there were any parts that were boring. And chances are, if they say, oh, this I was confused or this wasn't interesting, you can go back and you can reshape it and tweak it.
Love it.
That is your Fishbowl Friday. Go out and tell a story this weekend and email us. Let us know how it went. Have a great weekend, everybody. See you next time.
Bye.
If you'd like to submit a question for the Fishbowl, drop us an email at fishbowl@pinper.com. If you'd like to learn more about Pinnacle Performance Company, email us at info@pinper.com. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and tell your friends. See you next week.